I have been playing Dead by Daylight for a very, very long time now. I started playing this game back when Freddy Krueger released, and man am I glad about how much he has changed since. While granted, he has been one of the greatest roller coaster rides of all time, I do think that since then, and even going forward a little bit more, this game has had a lot of healthy changes. But I still do think that there are a lot of problems with the game. And in that, I'm talking about the perks. I think that there are a lot of perks in Dead by Daylight that need some serious attention. My original plan for this video was to discuss every single perk and whether I think it's balanced, if it's overpowered, or if it just needs some kind of other small fix. So today, I'm just going to go over perks that I don't see get a lot of play, whether it be because they suck or because they're just not practical. I want to discuss those perks because I think every perk should be valid in some way or another. But a good example of a perk that I don't think needs adjusting, but doesn't see a lot of play, at least from what I've seen, is Blood Warden. There are going to be a lot of perks like this in the game that have a very hard to set up ability, but come with a very good upside. And I think that we need more perks like this, because I think it would really mix up the game and would keep survivors on their feet more, rather than these boring metas of running into the same perks over and over and over again. Both as a killer and as a survivor, I seriously try to stray from using the same boring builds that everyone else uses, except for barbecue and chili and we're gonna live forever, just because of the blood point farming. While that, granted, may be the only reason why anyone runs them, it's a valid reason rather than just using decisive strike because you can't outrun the killer for a little bit, or as a killer, running ruin because you can't guard gens for a little bit. While granted, I do understand that these perks are valid and I've used them myself, I do think that these playstyles just encourage just sweaty gameplay instead of people running fun builds that they would rather enjoy than these crutch perks that they kind of have to run because the other person's also running crutch perks. If we encourage these more fun and enjoyable builds, I think it would encourage the game a little bit more. So, I want to start things off with a perk that I think has some serious potential, but it just doesn't execute it properly, and that's Beast of Prey. So, this perk has probably never seen use unless you're using an inept Huntress, and there's not a lot of people that do that. You just kind of slap Iron Maiden on her and call it a day. So, the biggest thing about Beast of Prey is that it kind of forces you to be bad, and it forces you to kind of throw the game a little bit and stay in a chase for a long period of time with a not very high reward. Sure, getting your red stain removed is good, but you can just moonwalk to compensate for that, so what does it really matter? I think that how this should work is that once you hit Bloodlust Tier 1, you can't go Tier 2 and you can't go Tier 3, but you get that undetectable status effect, and you stay in Bloodlust Tier 1 until successfully hitting the next survivor. While I do think this would make it a little bit overpowered maybe, I do think it's worth testing a concept like this, to where you could pretty much just run a survivor for a little bit, force them into an area away from where you're protecting, like let's say you have a very good 3-gen, and then now you have a free hit on another survivor, and you have to apply the risk and reward. Okay, do I have enough time to get this free hit? Can I do this? Is this speed boost and this undetectable status effect worth wasting a little bit of my time? It would kind of be like a better version of play with your food, which we'll definitely be discussing play with your food in a little bit, so don't worry guys, it's coming. It's coming. Another perk that I would like to talk about is Bloodhound. Bloodhound is a perk that does not see a lot of play either, and I think it's just because it's a good beginner perk. While some people may argue that, I mean, we need some just good beginner perks, I think that there's a way to validate using this perk in higher levels of play, and it would kind of be making it a default Deer Stalker. So, hear me when I say this. When you hit somebody and you have the perk Bloodhound, that same highlighted blood that appears on the ground when using this perk, some of those speckles of blood will appear on the survivor as well. While granted, you wouldn't be able to see these speckles of blood through walls, if you are looking at the survivor, they just could not hide in plain sight, effectively making it much harder for survivors to just hide and sneak around. Because there's not really a lot of perks that counter that. If you successfully gotten a hit on a survivor, there should be a perk that kind of disbands them from just hiding and forcing them to go into a chase. So that if you force them into a dead area and they just kind of hide from you, while granted that is kind of a skill issue on your part, there's plenty of perks to cover skill issues for both survivor and killer. So I don't see why this perk can't do that, and I think it would make it see a lot more play. Because I think Deerstalker is a pretty valid perk, and if you could see survivors, as long as they weren't hiding behind something, like you could kind of see a little bit of a shiny speckle on them, I definitely think that this perk would see a lot more play, because there are a lot of survivors that would just rather draw out the game and hide than just take the death hook when they're the last survivor left. And it's kind of frustrating to deal with. I don't want to have to run Deerstalker just to compensate for me slugging. It's kind of ridiculous. Speaking of Deerstalker, this is another perk that I think could see more use if it simply had one more small ability. If a survivor is knocked down and within your tear radius, their recovery speed is slowed by 20%. Throw that on there, and you're good to go. That's it. That's all I think it needs. To regress back a little bit, I want to talk about Dead Man Switch, because this is another perk that I think could be very good, but it just isn't. And the easy way to fix this is, instead of for the next 45 seconds when a survivor is hooked, it only is 20 seconds, but the timer does not start until someone actually gets off of a generator. So the reason why I think that this would be completely fair and okay for the game to do, you think about this for a second. As soon as Dead Man Switch is activated once, this perk may never activate again for the rest of the game. And the reason why I think that it would be much better to do it like this is because then it kind of forces survivors into a situation where, okay, am I going to accept not having this generator done for the next 20 seconds? And unhook my friend? Or am I going to let my friend take some more time on hook so that I can finish this generator? And it forces survivors to make a choice. Haha, funny pun. And I like perks that do this, where you pretty much force the survivors into either being altruistic or into being objective-based, which I think should be part of a killer's trope. All killers should have the ability to force a survivor's hand into making one decision or another that has negative consequences. This game is based on a map where the killer is the ruler of it, where it's their domain. Why aren't there more perks that do things like this? And I think making Dead Man Switch like this, it forces survivors, instead of just waiting out the 45 seconds, that the next time they get off of a generator, that gen's going to be blocked for a little bit. I think it would really make it a lot better, and I think it would make it see a lot more play. On the topic of Deathslinger perks, the next one that I want to talk about is Gearhead. I think that this is another perfectly fine perk that has a great concept, but it just isn't good in practice. The only reason why is the time constraint. So, while I understand why it's like this, I don't like when perks have a requirement and then also have kind of a nerf. So, you hit a survivor twice, knocking them down. You then get to see if a survivor hits a good skill check while repairing. So this perk is also completely dependent on A, if a survivor even gets a skill check within that 30 seconds, or B, if they hit a great skill check within those next 30 seconds. This is another one like Dead Man Switch that I think just should activate the next time a good skill check is hit. You succeeded in getting the 2 hits of this perk. Why should you then have to not get the reward of this perk for putting it in your slot because the survivors are just too good and hit great skill checks, or you just got unlucky and they got no skill checks within those 30 seconds. It just seems unfair to deny the killer of their own perk just because survivors are better or because you're unlucky. While I know it may seem a little hypocritical of me to say that denying a perk because survivors are good seems unreasonable, there are plenty of survivor perks that literally cancel out the killer being good just because of funny reasons. A great example of this is adrenaline. There are so many times that I have played against a survive with friends. I had complete dominance of the game. Most of them were on second or first hook, or most of them were on second or third hook. All of them were injured. One generator left. I had the plenty of ability to end the game and win, but all four had adrenaline and ripped the game from my hands. That's not very reasonable if you ask me. But granted, it's a perk and it's in the game, and I have no way of denying them that perk. Even if I hook them and they get unhooked, I can't deny them of that perk. So why should survivors be able to deny me of my perks? Just doesn't make any sense. So that's why I think Gearhead should be operated this way and not have a limited time of effect. And not to mention, this effect isn't even good enough to quantify hitting a survivor twice. If you're already doing well, just run barbecue and chili, and then you'll be able to see if a survivor's on a generator or not. I mean, there's better versions of this perk already, and they give you blood points. You may as well take away that 30-second time constraint. And if you're like, oh, well, then how are we going to tier this? Maybe give it another ability instead. I think that would be fine. I mean, barbecue and chili has 2 abilities, and it does exactly what this does, but a little bit better, because it's not just for generators. Maybe you'll get a killer instinct Q for a few seconds if a survivor's on that generator. For like 3, 4, then 5 seconds or something like that. I mean, I think that would be a much better alternative than what it is right now, and I don't think it would be very overpowered, because, I mean, you might not even have time to really do anything with that information. So, the next perk I want to talk about is Hex Huntress Lullaby. Honestly, there's only one way to fix this perk. No skill check warning. That's it. There are more powerful hex abilities. There are much more powerful hex abilities. Get rid of the sound cue. It's as easy as that. If someone seriously wants to have an argument with me that Devour Hope, which requires 5 tokens, is on equivalent ground to Huntress Lullaby, you're insane. While I understand this will be frustrating for survivors, there are plenty of hex totems that delay the game and kind of force survivors' hands into cleansing right away. I mean, I don't see why Huntress Lullaby can't not be this good. So, I don't think it would be that big of an issue, and it would require survivors to just pay more attention. These skill checks are still possible to hit. They're just a little more annoying. Now, this is the first one that needs a nerf in my eyes, because this is a completely unfair perk. Kind of like Adrenaline, because again, it completely nullifies the survivor's ability. If they have skill, if they can outrun you, it just denies them that because you can just one-shot them and you're faster. So, my biggest way of fixing this, get rid of the exposed status effect. Make it undetectable. There you go. Hex Noah is fixed. Makes it possible for survivors to escape, but it causes a complete shift in the game. While I understand that this perk would no longer be good on killers like Ghostface and potentially Michael Myers, and also Wraith, the movement speed is plenty enough of a buff. I don't think that you really need the exposed status effect too, but I do like it having another effect, and I think undetectable would be perfect. Like, as soon as you're done, you can't see the killer stain anymore, you can't hear them approaching you, and you seriously just have to make a run for it, but the killer still needs to have skill to knock you down, at least a little bit of skill, because they have to hit you twice like the game was designed to be. So, I think that making Noah like this would be a lot healthier for the game, and rely on killers to actually, you know, do well instead of relying on this crutch perk. Because even when it comes down to this, they'd still have to use this perk correctly. So, I think this would be much better. Next, I want to talk about Hex the Third Seal. So, now that we have Hex Plaything, I mean, it's essentially just a better version of Hex Third Seal, except Third Seal is a little bit better. And while I know that Plaything just makes you oblivious and not blind, oblivious is much better than blind. So I think that the biggest way to make this see a little bit more play would be just to add the Plaything ability. Only you can cleanse your own totem. It's as simple as that. And it would never change because, again, oblivious is much better than blindness. While I do think blindness has some validity to it, I think that this would be a good way to fix it. You get hit, you can only you can cleanse your own totem. I think that would make this just fine. Next up, I want to talk about Iron Maiden, because I have a lot of problems with the exposed status effect perks, and while I was going to talk about Dragon's Grasp a little bit, I decided to hold off on that because I think that there are some killers that it's valid on, and there's a lot of perks that are only good on certain killers. So I'm not going to really say much about it. But as for Iron Maiden, I seriously think that this perk is just insanely underwhelming and could be an insanely valid perk. And you know how I would say make it this way? Get rid of the exposed status effect on all lockers. And instead, let's do this. Whenever you hook a survivor, you get a token. You can then use this token to go up to a locker. You can open up that locker, costing a token, and making it an Iron Maiden locker. But now, instead of survivors screaming, they get Killer Instinct for the next 4 seconds. So essentially, if you predict where a survivor is going with Iron Maiden, you get the exposed status effect. This would require you to know where the survivor is going to go and what exactly their movement is going to be. I think this would make it a lot more skill-based. And I think it would kind of make it balanced in that way. If you're smart enough at this game that you could know what lockers survivors are going to hide into, you deserve to have an instant one-shot. This would be a very high skill, high reward, but it would not take away the value of the perk. And it would also make it that survivors have to start thinking, like, wait a minute, why do these killers always know where I'm at every time I go through a locker? They'd have to know you have Iron Maiden, which may even deny you of the exposed status effect. But if you call it right, good for you. You got a free knockdown. Maybe, depending on the situation. So I think kind of nerfing the exposed status effect to make it a little more practical, removing the scream so that survivors don't know you have Iron Maiden, would make this a lot better. Next up, I want to talk about Monstrous Shrine, because I think that this is an insanely underwhelming perk. Monstrous Shrine is like this basement coup de grace kind of perk, and I think it has a really easy fix. Let this perk make all basement hooks Scourge hooks. Doesn't add any effects. It doesn't even make it a Scourge hook perk or whatever. It just makes your basement hooks Scourge hooks. I think it would make it see a lot more play. And I think it would validate Scourge hooks even more. It would start encouraging these basement builds that instead of playing like a scumbag and just guarding the basement, you hook the basement and you just guard the area instead of the basement instead. Because I think basement builds are like honestly really fun to go against and fun to play with. So I think just adding that Scourge hook ability would add some interesting aspects to the game, and I personally believe would make it a lot, like, just a lot better. Make it see a lot more play. Play with your food used to be one of my favorite perks in this game, but now it's just kind of bad because you lose tokens too easily. There's a lot of killers that have quote-unquote lethal abilities, but they don't really always do that. There's a lot of killers that I think could get some validity out of this perk if it just removed the basic and special attack spending a token, and instead you just lost a token for hitting a survivor. Any survivor. Now, while I understand that this would encourage you to pretty much just hit the obsession, lose them in chase, and then go chase somebody else with your 3 tokens, knock them down, you still got 1 token, go back and use the obsession. you're wasting a lot of time using this perk. You're pretty much wasting time to get it back. And so to get that time back, you're pretty much relying on your own skill. If you use this perk right, you deserve to use it, and you shouldn't lose tokens unless you successfully hit a survivor. While I understand that people are like, oh, if you whiff an attack, you should lose a token. And I guess that makes sense, but sometimes you can whiff attacks and it can be strategic. There are plenty of times I have whiffed attacks intentionally to make survivors drop a pallet out of just sheer nervousness. That's an actual strategy that killers use. There's also the fact that if you're playing Hillbilly, you can't use this because if you use your chainsaw for movement, guess what? You lose stacks of this. You may also use Bubba's special attack for movement. But guess what? You can't do that because it'll take away all of your stacks. I don't like that. I don't think that's a good idea. You want to use Shred to break a pallet? Nope, you lose a stack. You want to use your chainsaw to break a pallet? Nope, that's a loss of a stack. I don't like this. I don't think that this is good. And I don't even think making whiffing an attack is a good idea either. While I understand this is a very good ability, I don't think that being able to restrict a killer's power to use this perk is worth it. And it pretty much makes it not valid on any killer. I mean, the only killer that I can really think of this being good on is maybe Trapper, if you somehow trap every survivor and just grab them out of it. Every time, you could get full usage out of this perk. That's like the only way I can really think about this perk being any good. And I don't think that that's how it should be used. So, lethality shouldn't matter. Connection is what should matter. Next up, we're going to talk about Predator, and I'm stealing my idea from this from a pretty funny video that dropped recently. And this YouTuber, who I'm not going to name, maybe because he broke my heart with his update on the 7.0 update of Dead by Daylight, he discussed that the scratch marks should be animated to flow in the way that the survivors are running. But I think that's a good idea, and I think that would work too, but here's my suggestion on Predator. Survivors still leave scratch marks from Tier 1, 2 seconds, Tier 2, 4 seconds, Tier 3, 6 seconds after they stop running. Now, I know that that sounds really overpowered, but if you have Fixated, you can easily counter that. Because you understand that they have Predator, so you can also use that to your advantage and start adjusting to it. It would be like a perk-on-perk clash. Predator counters base survivors, but if you have Fixated, you know that they have it, so you can properly counter their perk. I think it would make it see a lot more play, and I think it would make it pretty interesting. Next up is Remember Me. So, I think that this is alright, and I like the concept of it, and I think it works well with No Way Out, but I think that this can be buffed now just because No Way Out exists. While I think that people would be like, then killers would just be using their, their No-Ed, No Way Out, Remember Me builds and just kill all of us. Well, remember, if we go by the rules that we have my version of No-Ed, I think buffing this to 6 seconds would be fine. And I think it would see it get a little bit more play. I don't think the concept of this needs to be changed, but making it 6 seconds to a maximum of 24, I think that's fine. I don't see that as unreasonable. Alright guys, I think that I've come up with a way to make Spies from the Shadows probably one of the best perks in the game. You ready? Make all survivors spawn with Tier 1, 1 crow, Tier 2, 2 crows, Tier 3, 3 crows. Now, I understand that this might sound overpowered, but just like Lethal Pursuer, it would pretty much do the same thing, go away immediately, and survivors could all remove this effect just by playing the game. Either by A, doing a generator, B, running you, or however else you want to do this. But I think that this would make this perk perhaps one of the best perks in the game, because the only other real answer to it is Lethal Pursuer. It's kind of the only other good early game perk. And we need an early game perk that all killers can use. And I think that this would be the best way to do that. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why do we need a good early game perk on all killers? Because you shouldn't force the players of this game to have to buy DLC to compensate for some of these killers' flaws. If someone just wants to buy Ghostface and play Ghostface, but he really struggles with early game because he has to find survivors, then they should be able to do that. And the other thing about Spies from the Shadows compared to Lethal Pursuer is survivors don't know that you have Lethal Pursuer until the end of the game, or unless they're like, they found us way too fast, this guy has Lethal Pursuer. The downside to Spies from the Shadows would be that survivors know that you have this perk. So they can pretty much counter it immediately by just running around or maybe going to a gen or whatever. It would literally be a Lethal Pursuer that survivors are also aware of, and that they'd even get a little bit of a mental preparation for, because they'd spawn in the game with crows on them, so they'd be like, okay, this person is Spies from the Shadows. Personally, I think that this would make this perk so much more valid, and there are so many killers that need this good early game advantage. And I think that would give it to those killers that really desperately need it. Especially someone like Trapper. Like, Trapper would use this so well. It would definitely give him the time to, like, plan out, okay, this is where the survivors are, this is the area that I need the trap, this is the area that I need the guard. And then we could also use it on killers like Myers, if you don't want to have to buy Lethal Pursuer, if you don't want to buy Plague and get Corrupt Intervention. This would be a very valid way to get information in the beginning of the game without it being too overpowered, because survivors would also know how to go against it. Spies would be infinitely better if it worked this way. And if the devs want to argue that it's too overpowered, there are perks that are better than this. I would still argue that Lethal Pursuer is better than this because survivors don't know what's going on. And you basically force the survivors into playing Distortion. Well, granted, this would counteract Distortion. It pretty much would go away. The effects of it would go away by you just playing the game. So I don't see this. I would not see that as overpowered. I think it should at least be tampered with. I think it should at least be tried. So, I mean, even if they just want to make it that it, like, there's some other side effect and they only have 2 crows base so that the effect doesn't last as long, I'd be fine with that too. Like, if Spies kept its original ability and then they just spawn with 2 crows all the time, that would be fine too. But personally, I like the tier 1, 1 crow, tier 2, 2 crows, tier 3, 3 crows. I think it would be a lot better. And again, killers just need better base perks. I'm sorry, they do. Whether you disagree with me or agree with me, they need better base perks. So, because they've pretty much buffed every survivor base perk and none of the killer base perks. So, yeah. Alright, so hear me out. A lot of people are probably going to tell me that this perk does not need any changes because it's pretty much the same as Windows of Opportunity. However, I don't think that there should be a Windows of Opportunity on Killer, because I don't think that the killer needs to know where vault locations are. The reason why I say that is because you don't really control where the flow of the game goes. The survivor does because they run that way. While granted, you can kind of control the flow of the game by forcing survivors into specific areas by the way that you run to them. That's pretty much all you can do. But survivors might just take a hit and run the other way anyway. What if instead of doing this, this kind of worked like I'm all ears, but instead for them not doing fast actions? And here's what I mean by that. You would see the auras of survivors within 2 meters of a pallet or a window. I think that that's much more valid information. And I think being within a meter or 2 would make it pretty balanced, because you would just know that they're near a pallet. If they're just sitting on a pallet, if they're just sitting by a window, you'd kind of get to know their strategy a little bit, and you'd kind of get to see that played out a little bit better. People may argue that, oh wow, that's pretty overpowered. I think that I'm All Ears would still be better than this. And because I think I'm All Ears would be better than this, the secondary effect, since obviously I can't go, it would be 0 meters, then 1 meter, then 2 meters. I think that the secondary effect of this would be giving you a 2-4-6 buff to your pallet breaking and vaulting speeds. That might sound overpowered, but it would also only be while you are actively in chase. I think that this would make this a lot better. I think it would make it see more play. And personally, I think we just need more perks that increase vault speed because there's not a lot of them. And Bamboozled shouldn't be the only option, and Fire Up should not be the only option. Although personally, if I'm going to be honest, I also think that there should be survivor perks that guarantee like fast vaults and stuff like that. So trust me, I'm not just saying this to be killer-sided. There are a lot of survivor perks that I want to talk about that need buffs as well. I just think that there are more killer perks that need buffs in my opinion, because survivor perks got a lot of overhauls already. While they didn't really do the same with killer perks, especially when like a lot of the base ones need adjustment. I mean, granted, I know that I didn't talk about a lot of them. I think a lot of them need just complete overhauls rather than just moderate adjustments. Well, granted, I know that I talked about my Spies from the Shadows overhaul. I think that that one is okay to talk about because I feel like people might actually be like, oh crap, that's actually like a good idea. So whether you take the 2 crows or the 1, 2, 3 crows idea, I think everyone can agree that that's a lot better of a perk. It would make it kind of valid and maybe even one of the best perks in the game. And people might be like, oh, well, you can't have a perk accessible by everybody be one of the best perks in the game. I mean, I don't know, man. I feel like that's kind of fine. And while I know that a lot of the survivor perks, like, aren't really that good, even though they have been buffed, like Slippery Meat and stuff like that. Dude, small game is busted, especially now with the Boon Totem meta. I'm sorry. There are definitely base survivor perks that are that good. So I don't see why killers can't have one base perk that's also that good. I definitely don't see why. So I think that pretty much concludes every perk that I had some minor issues with. There are some other ones that I think are kind of but they are just valid on certain killers and certain builds, so I didn't really care about coming up with some sort of weird change to them because I don't see the need. I know that this video was a little long, but I think it was worth it. If you'd like to see me talk about the survivor side of things, make sure to get 10 likes on this video, and I will make that whenever I have time to. Probably by like the new year, next month, I'll do that video. Thank you guys for tuning in. While this is going to be the last video of the new year, I hope to drop more content. Please follow my Twitch. Please follow my Instagram and my Twitter. All the links are going to be in the description below. But before the video is over, I would like to thank the sponsor of this video, IYKYK Clothing Company. IYKYK is a great clothing band that has a great mission. Their absolute main objective is to spread nothing but joy and positivity throughout their product. As a longtime consumer, I can assure you that the hoodies and shirts are not only comfortable to wear, but also help you to look good while doing so. With a variety of designs coming from a 420 special, Halloween, Christmas, and even a sneaky SpongeBob reference, there is truly something for anyone at IYKYK. Links to his socials as well as the shop will also be in the description below. Thank you IYKYK for supporting this channel. And on that note, guys, that is going to be the end of the video. Again, you know the goal. If you want to see a survivor-sided version of this, I'd be more than happy to do so. My Twitch stream schedule is Tuesdays and Thursdays from 7 to 8:30, and Saturdays around lunchtime. I know that's a little vague, but you gotta do what you gotta do. Anyway, guys, have a great rest of your day, and stay frosty.